A warm welcome to all of you from different parts of the globe tonight in Dublin, or this evening in Dublin, to our special meeting, Why BDS? And a special welcome and a warm welcome to our panelists, Fatin Tamimi, Chairperson of the Irish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, Professor Richard Falk, Emeritus Professor of International Law and Practice at Princeton University, and Omar Barghouti. Have you in Dublin tonight. The evening is hosted by Comhlámh, that's the Irish Association of Development Workers and Volunteers, and it's organised tonight by Comhlámh Justice for Palestine group. The running order of this evening will be as follows. I want to first introduce Mark Cummings, who is head of Comhlámh, to say a few words and maybe to set the evening in some context. Then we'll have our three speakers who will each, our panelists, who will each speak to us on various topics for a time. And then we will go into a question and answer session. Following the question and answer session, I'll call on Katie Martin, who is a member of the Comhlámh Justice for Palestine group, and she'll say a few words. And I think what I might do then is go back to the panelists, if you don't mind, and maybe give us a final question of encouragement before we finish the evening. You're welcome to drop questions into the chat box as we go along, and you can share the video also. So I think we'll get straight into it and invite Mark Cummings, head of Comhlámh, to say a few words. Off you go, Mark.
Great, thank you, Dermot. Thanks for that introduction, and well done to you and the members of the Justice for Palestine group. Again, I'm delighted to be on such a panel with such esteemed guests tonight. Yeah, my name is Mark. I'm the head of Comhlámh. Comhlámh is the Association of Development Workers and Volunteers. We were set up in 1975 to support those who've worked from Ireland in the Global South, to support them on the return back into Ireland and to bring the learning back home, what they've learned and experienced in the Global South, and to continue their work for justice here from Ireland. One of the interesting aspects about Comhlámh is that it is an association then of members, and one of our ways of working then is the Comhlámh membership groups. And there are several active membership groups drawn from the interests of Comhlámh members, ranging from issues to do with trade justice, questions of global access to medicines, and also looking at refugee and migrant rights, those who have come to seek refuge in Ireland. The newest group in Comhlámh is the Justice for Palestine group, and they have brought Comhlámh on a journey of exploring what BDS means, and these issues have been actively considered by our board, but also at our General Assembly earlier this year. And we're delighted to say that Comhlámh is supporting the global BDS movement. And the first activity, I suppose, public activity in this respect then is this event tonight. And well done to the Justice for Palestine group for bringing this together. Thank you again to our panelists, and we look forward to a very rich discussions, very rich information, and good participation online, the best we can do on why BDS. So Dermot, back over to you. Thank you.
So thanks, Mark, for that. Thank you very much for giving the evening here in Dublin some context. It's I'm just thinking to myself, it's quite a historic day for a large organisation such as Comhlámh to adopt a BDS position. And I really think the board of Comhlámh should be commended for taking that courageous decision. And I think I see it in the face of efforts in different countries to ostracize organizations such as Comhlámh that adopt that position. And we even know there's legislation being passed to attempt to criminalize people who adopt the BDS position. So well done to the board of Comhlámh. Well, congratulations on that. I think other NGOs may follow that example, so it is historic. So let's get on with the panelists. I'm going to welcome again Fatin Al-Kamini, and she's part of the Palestinian diaspora. She's lived in Ireland, of course, for over 30 years, and she initially hails from Hebron and Gaza, and she still has close family and relatives living there. She's been an active campaigner for Palestinian rights over many years. In 2016, she was elected chairperson of the Irish Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, and she still holds that position. So over to you, Fatin, and give us your knowledge, please.
Thank you, Dermot. And first, I want to congratulate all of you in Comhlámh, especially the Justice for Palestine Committee, for taking this right step, and it is a historic step, as you said, for adopting the global BDS campaign and standing in solidarity with my people in Palestine, who are facing the darkest days with the brutal military occupation, colonization, home demolition, daily arrests, annexation, mass incarceration, and racist apartheid, and on top of that, cruel pandemic, and on top of all that as well, the recent new wave of official normalization that's happening from the Gulf Arab states, unfortunately, stabbing the Palestinian people at the back. So to all this my people are facing, it's thrilling to know that a group such as Comhlámh supporting and adopting this BDS, as there is no normalization, there is no normal, there is nothing normal about the apartheid state of Israel. As Dermot introduced me, I am a Palestinian. I still have a family in Palestine. I was born in the diaspora. I was born to parents who came from Palestine. My parents left Palestine or went to work in Qatar in the late 50s. Then in the 1967 war, they weren't allowed after that to go back to Palestine to live there. They were stripped from their identity. So we were born in the exile. I still lived in an exile because of the Israel apartheid laws, and millions of Palestinians do so again, who were forced out of their homeland, or they left for work, like my parents, to work outside the country, and then were forbidden from coming back to live there. I still have family back home who are living in Gaza. I have a sister in Gaza, niece and nephews I haven't met yet because of the siege has been there for the past 13 years. They're living with very little electricity, no drinkable water, and of course, so many, there's no freedom of movement as well. Even the cancer treatment, as some of my family had cancer, unfortunately, and they couldn't travel for treatment. They wouldn't allow them to go and have their cancer treatment, as well as because of the siege, the hospitals there lack of all the basic materials to treat people in there. I have family in Hebron as well who live again under no freedom of movement whatsoever. Maybe they're better than the people in Gaza, but still there's no freedom of movement for them to go visit Jerusalem, for example, or visit my other relatives in Gaza. So I have two relatives in Gaza and in Hebron that they can't visit each other. So because of the apartheid laws, Israel apartheid system. For me, I moved to Ireland in 1988. I came to Ireland with my husband, and of course, I carried Palestine with me. The love of the Palestine, the love of our heritage. I shared our heritage, our culture, our food, our language, and all with my Irish friends. I raised my family to be a real Palestinian family in the diaspora. Unfortunately, we can't go and visit because of Israel racist again, and I'm going to explain more even when I speak further about my role in the IPSC. After raising my children in 2008, I joined the Ireland Palestine Solidarity Campaign, a group or an organization that works solely for the Palestinians' rights. We do advocate for the Palestinians. We promote their culture. We lobby the we lobby the Irish government, the politicians, for all the Palestinian rights. We support Palestinians wherever they are in the historic Palestine, in all historic Palestine, and the Palestinians in the refugees who were made refugees by the state of Israel and living in the refugee camps in the neighboring countries. And we support all the Palestinians in the diaspora. We do not take any political stand by like with any other group. We are independent, and since 2016, as Dermot mentioned, I was elected to be the national chair of this organization, and I'm proud to say I am the official face of this organization, that the largest and strongest organization in Ireland that works for the Palestinians' rights. It's really important for me to, when I heard about the call of Justice for Palestine group, I was thrilled to hear that call of. Through the years, of course, they've been educating people and supporting the Palestine, but now they moved a step forward to campaigning and more advocacy to the Palestinian rights with working with the IPSC and other organizations, and of course, adopting the BDS movement or campaign. It is very important for the Palestinians themselves in Palestine to know that while states may abandon them, the official states, the international communities, but there is a strong and widespread civil society support for their struggle for freedom and justice. As every civil society organization that comes on board helps to build and strengthen the BDS movement and the wide coalition we aim to build in defense of the Palestinian rights, especially when a group that is as respected and has such a laudable history as Comhlámh. In Ireland, we need to really work together really hard to support, and IPSC, I should say, that we fully support, of course, and promote and adopt the BDS movement fully. And we had so much achievement regarding that. For us, as this BDS, adopting the BDS fully and working through it, we were banned on 2017, I think, if I remember right. Israel had a blacklist with organizations that weren't allowed to go to visit Israel, Palestine, because of their work. And the Ireland Palestine Solidarity Campaign was one of these organizations in that blacklist. That is, of course, a badge of honor for us, for me personally, but it's personally as well, it affected me because I can't officially go now and visit Palestine. I knew before that I might have difficulties visiting because of the BDS, but now after the blacklist, that means it affected me personally that I can't officially go as the chair of the Ireland Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and they are in the blacklist. So this effectiveness is an evidence of this BDS. That's why Israel government had created a whole ministry to counter the BDS campaign, and the Zionist propaganda machinery has been busy trying to criminalize these groups and activists, as Dermot, I think, mentioned briefly. So part of it is that the IPSC are, I am like a criminal now. They won't allow me to go and visit my homeland, which I have all the right to go and visit. I couldn't go and say goodbye to my grandmother when she died a few years ago because of these rules, apartheid rules by Israel. So in Ireland, we need to work together with Comhlámh and other groups. Of course, we need to push for the few things. One of them is banning all the trade. Of course, support Frances Black's bill, which is the Occupied Territories bill, when she has the time to address it again to the Dáil. And we have to push for banning all the trade with Israel illegal settlements at an EU level, for the suspension of Israel from the Euromed Association Agreement and from Horizon Framework funding programs, Horizon 2020. One of these projects in this Horizon 2020 is called, we need to really target and end. It's called Roxanne, which involves a collaboration between Gardaí and the PSNI and the Israeli Ministry of Public Security. This same ministry which kills, threatens, and arrests my people in Palestine in daily basis. So we'd like all you to join in that, as well as as our work with our, lobby our government as well to take an action on that and sanction Israel for that. And as if the government doesn't take and won't take this action, even in the face of the widespread public support of Palestinian rights, then we must continue building our effective resistance and solidarity from the grassroots up to force situation where the Palestinians' freedom simply cannot be ignored any longer. So the Ireland Palestine Solidarity Campaign, along with trade unions, Friends of Palestine, Gaza Action Ireland, Academics for Palestine, Kairos, Students for Justice for Palestine, and hopefully Comhlámh will come on board. They supported the leadership in support of the leadership Palestinian BDS movement, and now all launching the new campaign called Apartheid Free Zone. The Apartheid Free Zone are a new and growing global initiative that will help to transform our local communities into spaces of solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. By pledging to support the BDS campaign that aims to help Palestinians to win our freedom and publicly declaring themselves to be an Israeli apartheid-free zone. Shops, restaurants, businesses, community organizations, trade unions, Comhlámh, and all kinds of other groups can take an important stand in this and have their places as a free apartheid zone. In the past, the international community came together to reject and help bring the apartheid regime in South Africa to an end through effective accountability measures, and equally urgent situations today calls us to once again help end decades of Israel oppression of the Palestinian people. The UN can no longer stay silent. It must act now.
Thank you.
BDS?
Thank you, Fatin.
BDS, because Israel is an apartheid state and should be fought in the same manners that apartheid in South Africa was fought through sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for, sorry for cutting you short.
No problem.
I'm just
Sorry.
conscious of the time, but because you obviously have much more to say on this issue, and I'm sure you do, and you could talk for more, and we'll come back to the questions. So thank you for reminding us of these harsh conditions in Palestine and in Gaza and in the West Bank. And also something which struck me there was your own personal sacrifice with your family and so on. These are some of the consequences of the regime that you're talking about, the personal sacrifices that people like yourself make. So thank you very much for that personal touch on that.
Thanks.
So I'll welcome our next panelist, Professor Falk, and he probably needs no introduction to some of you. He's Emeritus Professor of International Law and Practice at Princeton University in New York. He's also Chair of Global Law, Queen's Mary University in London. He's written numerous books, over 20, and lots of articles, diverse topics: global terror, nuclear weapons, human rights, international law, and of course has written extensively on the Palestinian conflict, and his text Palestinian Horizon Towards a Just Peace is quite famous. He served in the past as UN Special Rapporteur for Occupied Palestine Human Rights Council from 2008 and 2014. He's like Fatin, he's an outspoken critic of Israeli policy. And if I'm correct, you accused them of practicing apartheid back in 2010, of committing war crimes in Gaza, and of course, carrying out ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem and other parts of the West Bank. So we're very pleased to have you here, Richard. So off you go.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be on this panel. And I congratulate both the conveners and the Comhlámh organization for, forgive my Gaelic, which is far from perfect, for endorsing BDS, because this is a time, historic time, when I believe BDS is more important than it's ever been. And I say this in view of what now is clear to all but those who are most ideologically blind or defiant, and that is the absolute failure and impotence of international diplomacy to bring a just and sustainable peace to Israel-Palestine relations. It's been obvious to me, and I think to many others, that for a long time, at least since the beginning of the Oslo diplomacy in 1992 and 93, that Israel had no strong incentive to reach a just solution to the conflict. And they were prepared to pretend to use diplomacy as a way of gaining time to consolidate their incremental annexation of the West Bank and their continuing ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem. So that diplomacy not only didn't bring a solution, but it put expansionist Zionism in its strongest position ever and weakened the Palestinian struggle. So in one way, it's an encouraging development, I think, that it's no longer possible to expect intergovernmental diplomacy or the United Nations to be the agent of change and to finally bring the Palestinian struggle on the realization of Palestinian self-determination. So that shifts the basic political challenge from its traditional diplomatic level of trying to impose a solution from above, so to speak, to making it clear that if there is to be a just solution, it will come from the mobilization of people and from global solidarity initiatives. And the BDS campaign has distinguished itself as the most effective and globally constituted initiative that relies on nonviolent soft power to exert pressure from below and outside in relation to the conflict. And as Fatin had said, the effectiveness of BDS is confirmed by the energies that Israel and its friends have taken to discredit BDS and criminalize it. I remember very well the anti-apartheid struggles in the South African context. And one thing that never happened, including in the United States, where there was a lot of opposition to the BDS campaign back in the 1980s and early 90s, but what never happened was to discredit those that were in support of BDS, including the activists. And the thought of criminalizing this kind of freedom of expression testifies in a sense to an almost desperate reaction by Israel and world Zionism that this was so effective in relation to South Africa that every possible means must be used to prevent this movement from exerting any kind of comparable pressure. And the apartheid character of South Africa is embedded in the failure to find any sort of accommodation between Palestinian struggle and the Israeli reality. And that the historical context is quite important in two ways. One way is that Israel and Zionism, from its outset, had the challenge of imposing a Jewish state on a non-Jewish society. And to do that in a period of decolonization meant resistance. And if there would be resistance, there would have to be effective repression. And if a state such as Israel, which is based on ethnic exclusivity, the claim that it's a Jewish state for the exclusive benefit of the Jewish people, for that to happen in the period of decolonization means that you essentially have to have an apartheid regime governing it. Israel's very different than South Africa, and its way of implementing apartheid has been very different. It has relied on through the Nakba, the expulsion going back to 1947-48, the denial of a right of return of refugees and exiles, and the effort to fragment the Palestinian movement in every way possible. But these are all methods of exerting ethnic discriminatory control over a subjugated people. And it's that feature of exerting this systematic control on the basis of race that makes it reasonable and persuasive to talk of Israel as an apartheid regime. And it also, as is well known, apartheid is one of the crimes against humanity that's listed in the statute of the International Criminal Court. And this again legitimates resistance to the perpetuation of such a criminal process of controlling a people. And Israel had the second complexity for the Zionist movement was that it sought legitimacy partly by being quote unquote democratic. And it couldn't be democratic so long as it had a majority Arab population within its borders. So the expulsion of Arab majority back in 47 was embedded in this essential Israeli struggle and the essential Zionist struggle to somehow manage to be colonial in an anti-colonial historical period and to be democratic despite being a minority imposing their will on a resident majority. So in one sense, that kind of project leads to this sort of reality. And although Palestinian resistance and global solidarity have been quite impressive over this long period of a century, Israel enjoys something South Africa didn't enjoy, and that is the unconditional support of the United States and the geopolitical muscle that brings to the Israeli attempt to extinguish Palestinian rights to the extent possible. And this has been brought to a extreme during the Trump presidency in the US, which has really made no effort to hide its unconditional partisanship and green light given to Israeli unlawfulness, criminality, and expansionism. These earlier American presidents at least tried to pretend that they were interested in some kind of negotiated end to the struggle of the Palestinians. The Trump presidency uses some of that diplomatic rhetoric, but what they're trying to do is to not preside over a negotiation, but preside over a diktat or a decreed or imposed that even the Palestinian Authority has been unwilling to participate in, even though it had in the past always tried to show that it was willing to talk about some kind of negotiation, even though the prospects of a favorable outcome were very limited. So what I want to say, and the message I would emphasize, is that the campaign for global solidarity as led by the BDS movement is vital for the future of Palestinian rights, and that it should no longer be a matter of waiting for the UN or waiting for international diplomacy, much less the kind of framework that the US has presided over in past so-called peace process developments. So it's a crucial time. The Palestinians look as though they have been outmaneuvered, including by the Palestinian neighbors in the Middle East. But I think if we look deeper at the struggle, it has now long depended on pressure from below and resistance from within. And that is the essence of what the BDS campaign is trying to catalyze. And it really is time that the more enlightened political leaders throughout the world gave up this illusion of a negotiated intergovernmental framework as the basis of peace and joined with the solidarity movement by imposing sanctions that would give some realistic hope that governments as well as people can bring about change at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Falk, for that analysis. Very interesting. We may come back to that issue of obviously international responsibility in our Q&A. I'm sure people will have questions on like what responsibility has the international community in this regard. But we'll leave that for the question and answers. So we're also very honored here in Dublin to have Omar Barghouti from Palestine with us this evening. He again needs a little introduction to some of you. He's of course the co-founder of the Palestinian-led Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement for Palestinian Rights. He's written the definitive book on BDS, the BDS, the Global Struggle for Palestinian Rights. He's a long-time Palestinian human rights defender and a long-time activist. So over to you, Omar, for your talk.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation, and many Palestinians appreciate your organization's adoption of BDS. We think this will really help our struggle in Ireland and possibly beyond. Many Palestinians, myself included, feel at home in Ireland more than any other Western country. Your heroic struggle against centuries of colonialism has always inspired our own ongoing struggle against Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid. In the 1980s, when I was a student activist at Columbia University in New York, a much less hospitable place for Palestinians than Dublin, I was part of the Black-led campaign to pressure Columbia to divest from companies complicit in apartheid South Africa, a history that Professor Falk has reminded us of. When asked if I thought apartheid would end in my lifetime, my answer was no, but it is my moral duty, regardless, to stand on the right side of history. But apartheid did end in South Africa a few years later, and no one can take away from me this empowering thought that I played a very modest role in this grand victory of justice. When hope stems from hard strategic work, persistence, and moral clarity, it motivates us to resist not just injustice, but all the attempts by powerful oppressors to colonize our minds with despair. Today in the US, in the UK, Germany, France, and elsewhere, there's a heightened level of draconian repression against Palestine solidarity in general and against the BDS movement for Palestinian rights in particular. This shrinking space for democratically asserting and advocating Palestinian rights may drive some activists to despair, but that is the very goal of their knee of repression, choking our necks of activism. The South African Black consciousness leader Steve Biko once wrote, quote, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed," end of quote. Indeed, our oppressors do not only colonize our lands, they simultaneously and relentlessly strive to sear into our consciousness an abject sense of hopelessness through dehumanization, isolation, and violent crushing of any resistance. Israel has for decades been perpetrating war crimes and crimes against humanity against my people. It is tightening its fatal 13-year-old siege of 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, as my colleague Fatin has mentioned, denying Palestinians their basic necessities, even crayons and musical instruments, while bombing them repeatedly to make them submit. Israel has even at one point counted the per capita calories that are allowed into the Gaza ghetto, as the BBC reported at the time, to keep people at the edge of starvation or to put them, quote, on a diet, as a senior Israeli official once admitted. As a result, the UN said that Gaza would be unlivable by this year. This is in addition to Israel's land-grabbing construction of illegal settlements and gradual ethnic cleansing, especially in occupied Jerusalem, the Jordan Valley, and the Negev, and Israel's denial of our most basic rights as a people. This is what the ongoing Palestinian Nakba looks like. This is what trying to colonize our minds with hopelessness means. 15 years ago, the broadest coalition in Palestinian society launched the global BDS movement to contribute to our liberation struggle. BDS calls for non-violent pressure on Israel's regime of oppression and institutions and corporations that are complicit in this oppression to achieve our inalienable rights to freedom, justice, and equality. We work to simultaneously decolonize our minds as well as our lands. Begun in 2005 by the broadest coalition in Palestinian society, BDS calls for non-violent pressure to end Israel's 1967 occupation, end its system of institutionalized racial discrimination, which meets the UN definition of apartheid, and uphold the right of Palestinian refugees to return to the homes and lands they were uprooted and dispossessed from since 1947, 1948. As Israel becomes a role model for far-right, xenophobic, or authoritarian leaders across the world, from Trump and Salvini to Orban, and from Bolsonaro and Modi to Mohammed bin Salman, its popularity is declining worldwide. Defenders of Israeli apartheid, especially in the US and UK, have desperately invested massive political and financial resources in the last few years to suppress speech on Palestinian rights and to demonize or even criminalize our nonviolent BDS movement, as Fatin mentioned. Through intimidation, spying, and weaponizing claims of anti-Semitism, they're trying to keep Israel on a pedestal, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa once said, above accountability and beyond censure. But they are failing. In a major setback for Israel's legal war on BDS, the European Court of Human Rights this year ruled that the French government's legal persecution of BDS activists calling for a boycott of Israeli goods violates the right to freedom of expression, which is guaranteed by European conventions on human rights. In fact, the European Union, the governments of Sweden, Ireland, and Netherlands, as well as leading international human and civic rights organizations like Amnesty, International Federation for Human Rights, American Civil Liberties Union, and others, have all defended the right to boycott Israel as a matter of freedom of speech. BDS is increasingly being recognized as a significant partner in a growing international, intersectional, progressive wave fighting for global indigenous, racial, economic, gender, social, and climate justice against the forces of fascism, xenophobia, and savage neoliberalism. Anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the BDS movement has consistently and categorically opposed all forms of racism and discrimination, including anti-Black racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. One's identity the movement upholds should never diminish or restrict one's entitlement to rights. Our movement, therefore, targets complicity, not identity. And BDS is not just morally consistent and progressive, it's very effective. In September 2015, Veolia, the French conglomerate, became the first international corporation to end all involvement in Israel's illegal business, following an extensive 7-year BDS campaign that cost Veolia tenders worth of billions of dollars. Other companies like the telecommunications giant Orange and Ireland's largest building materials company, CRH, followed, pulling out of Israel's economy in 2016. Bowing to BDS pressure after suffering what the Financial Times called reputational damage, G4S, the world's largest private security company, decided also in 2016 to end most of its involvement in Israel's illegal business. G4S had lost contracts in Jordan, Norway, Lebanon, the European Parliament, South Africa, Colombia, among others. But G4S remains a global BDS target because of its major role in training Israeli police forces, notorious for committing crimes against Palestinians, especially in occupied East Jerusalem. In the first week of 2016, the United Methodist Church, whose fund is worth over $20 billion, declared the 5 largest Israeli banks off limits for investment and divested from the 2 that it held in its portfolios, following the lead of the second largest Dutch pension fund, which divested then from Israeli banks. More recently, another massive Dutch pension fund, ABP, divested from 2 Israeli banks, Leumi and Apoalim, over concerns about human rights. The city of Dublin in 2018 became the first European capital to adopt BDS. Mainstream churches in South Africa have endorsed BDS, while major churches in the US, including the Presbyterians, the United Methodists, and others, have divested from complicit companies and banks. Today, members of the US Congress endorse BDS or defend the right to advocate for BDS and call for leveraging US aid to Israel to hold it accountable to international law. Tens of cities and hundreds of cultural institutions and public spaces in the Spanish state, Italy, Belgium, Norway, Ireland, and elsewhere have declared themselves apartheid-free zones, which Fatin has alluded to, calling for an arms embargo on Israel or excluding from public tenders corporations that are implicated in Israel's human rights violations. In 2019, despite Israel's much-hyped propaganda around its hosting of the massive European Song Contest Eurovision and its expectations to attract up to 50,000 tourists to flood Tel Aviv, less than 5,000 tourists made the trip. Thousands of cultural figures have endorsed the cultural boycott, including in Canada, Ireland, South Africa, and the UK, as have many thousands of academics worldwide supported the institutional academic boycott of Israeli universities. BDS calls, above everything else, for doing no harm. Do no harm. That means ending complicity in Israeli apartheid and oppression. The EU, including Ireland, maintains a web of military relations, weapons research, banking transactions, and settlement trade with Israeli companies, banks, and institutions that are deeply implicated in human rights violations. This is why the bill that Senator Francis Black is sponsoring is extremely important to support. Standing in solidarity with Palestine today means working in Ireland to end these links of criminal complicity in Israeli apartheid. With your solidarity, we shall continue not just to exist, but also to peacefully resist and to insist on a life that is worth living, or what South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu calls on the full menu of rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omar, for that and the words of encouragement to us here in Ireland. Very much appreciated. And also for your clear exposition of BDS and as a non-violent protest for Palestinian rights. It's good to remind us, and you did so there, that these Palestinian rights apply not only to the Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, but also to those Palestinians living within Israel who suffer, and also those Palestinian refugees who live outside Palestine, Israel. I think sometimes these are forgotten and the concentration is on West Bank and Gaza. And also I was struck there, the European Court of Human Rights decision. I think it's good to remind us of that, because I know in Ireland, maybe elsewhere, some people are fearful of BDS, and they're afraid of being tarred by a brush of criminality or anti-Semitism. And it's good to remind us that BDS is actually a matter of free speech, and that people have a right to protest. And I think, thank you for that. So what we're going to do next is we have some questions coming in. Can you just give me a minute's pause while I compile the questions? They've been coming from the organizers. So just 1 minute silence and we'll be with you with some questions. Thank you. So I have a question here from Michael, and maybe I'll direct this first to you, Omar. So the question that Michael is asking is, how strong are voices that support BDS within Israel? Are there voices within Israel that support BDS? And do you work with these voices? So maybe you could say a few words on that.
Sure.
We might ask the other panelists to kick in later.
Sure. Thank you so much for this question. We have hundreds of Jewish Israeli activists, more than 1,000, who have come together and supported BDS from within. They established a group called Boycott from Within since 2009, since the Israeli massacre in Gaza, end of 2008, beginning of 2009. And they have a very clear moral justification and logic behind their call. They're saying we, as part of the oppressors, must act to end our own complicity in this system by speaking out, by asking the world to boycott the state that's oppressing Palestinians. It's certainly good for the Palestinians, but it's also good for them because they no longer want to live by the sword. Ordinary Israelis are increasingly thinking enough killing, enough apartheid, enough racism and racial discrimination. They want to live like normal people. They want to think of where their kids will go to college or will have a partner to live with and so on, not to worry about their kids going to fight Palestinians, killing Palestinians, besieging Gaza, refusing entry to people like Fatin or to Palestinian refugees from exile. So I think, yes, Israeli voices that support BDS are very important, despite their small numbers. I mean, 1,000 is not a big number, but they're very impactful and they do play a very important role in the movement, in the BDS movement, and we deeply appreciate their partnership.
Okay, thank you. Fatin or Richard, do you want to come in on this or will we go on to the next question?
I think Omar admirably responded, and I would just endorse what he had.
Second that.
Yeah, thank you. There's one here from Mary, and I might give this to you, Richard. And it's I don't know, it's a futuristic one. Can you envisage any time in the near future that the UN would impose sanctions on Israel as they did on South Africa in the day?
I cannot envision that in the near future, so long as the Security Council has the veto power, at least the US, without a revolutionary modification of its foreign policy toward the Middle East in general and Israel in particular, would never support any kind of sanctions initiative. That doesn't mean that the UN can't create an atmosphere in which sanctions become much more normalized. For instance, the General Assembly could pass a resolution advocating the imposition of sanctions. That would not have a decisional authority of the sort that a Security Council decision would have, but it would be very influential, and if it came to pass, would create a certain kind of political panic on the part of those that are supporting the Israeli status quo. So I do think the UN has a role to play, but not the kind of role that it was able to play in the South African case, where even the UK and US, which had strategic connections with the apartheid regime in South Africa in a Cold War setting, even they were induced by the pressure from their own peoples to go along with UN sanctions. We can't expect that, I don't think, realistically in the foreseeable future. But as I think Omar pointed out, the foreseeable future should not be confused with the real future, which will be, which will have its surprises, good and bad.
Thank you. That's interesting. Yeah, I suppose we sometimes think of this tipping point where nothing's happening and then something happens all of a sudden. And I suppose, as you referred to Omar earlier, sometimes the darkest time is a time when something strategic can happen very quickly. There's a question here from Helen, which is more an Irish question, I guess, in the Irish context of the Occupied Territories Bill. We had expected to get that bill through our parliaments, but of course it was blocked and not defeated, but essentially blocked by the ruling party. And the question is where to go, where do you think we should go from here? And maybe Omar, you would start this. Where should we go from here since the bill is blocked? And maybe Fatin, you could come in on what you think of what we should do next.
Actually, I would defer to IPSC and to Fatin, because yes, as you said, it's a very Irish question. From my point, I know that Frances Black is not giving up. She's a fighter. She will continue to the very end to get it passed. But I'll pass this to Fatin.
Yeah, so Fatin, maybe you'd have some words of encouragement for people out there who maybe are a little depressed at the bill being blocked after so many years.
No, we can't give up. As Omar, I echo Omar's what he said, that Frances Black will never give up, and I'm confirming that she will not give up, and she's just waiting for the right moment to put it again to the doll, and hopefully it will go through with the people pressure. We need you. We need every single Irish person in this island to put pressure on their politicians, TDs, to make this happen. We were very, very close, and then at the end, unfortunately, something happened. We were very disappointed for the outcome of it with the Greens and the Comhlámh. But we will keep the pressure definitely. When we're just waiting for the right moment for Frances Black to bring it back, and we'll be lobbying again and asking people to lobby the politicians. We can't give up. We can't live without hope. We have to keep it.
Thank you. So really remain active, campaign with the politicians, lobby the politicians. That's what you're suggesting we do at this stage.
Oh, join Ireland Palestine Solidarity Campaign.
Or join of course.
Any organization that works for the Palestinian rights to end Israel's impunity. We have to work together, because we can't work solely. We have to work all together to make it happen, and it will work. It will work, as it happened in the apartheid regime in South Africa. It will end it in Palestine, even if we can't see it now, but it will happen. That's guaranteed until a year. Keep the hope.
Thank you. Omar, I wanted to ask you something myself here. I don't think the audience will mind. Are there any particular global boycotts that are going on at the moment that people should be aware of or that they could join and so on?
Sure. There are some global campaigns as well as some regional or national campaigns, because a key operational principle in BDS is context sensitivity, which means that we have to be sensitive to any particular context. There isn't a one size that fits all, but there are still some global campaigns that can be targeted everywhere. For example, Hewlett-Packard, HP, computers and so on. This is a company that's responsible for the servers used by the Israeli immigration and population registries, which are a pillar of apartheid. So HP is providing the technology to be a basis for Israeli apartheid. So HP computers, printers, and so on, that would be a good target, especially HPE, because there are two HP companies. HP Enterprise would be the best company to go after in terms of ending contracts with them, as well as divesting from them. And some churches in the US have divested from HP, in fact. Some churches are boycotting HP products entirely in the United States. So that's one idea. G4S, I mentioned the British security conglomerate, is a very good target. And that is an interesting story because it's a very intersectional target in the sense that G4S is responsible for many miseries and human rights violations around the world, especially with immigrants in the UK, in the United States, and against people of color in general. G4S used to be involved with the private incarceration system in the US. They're involved now with some of the US immigration forces that are treating immigrants like criminals. So G4S would be another good campaign. There are also AXA, which is a large insurance company. We're calling for a boycott of AXA. And there are several others. CAF in the Basque Country, which produces trains for Israel's apartheid, Jerusalem Light Rail, and so on.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very useful information for our audience. I have a question here from Eamon. I think this one is probably for you, Richard. Ilan Pape referred to Israel's slow genocide as far back as 2006. Do you think yourself that Israel is guilty of genocide? More academic question, maybe.
Well, it's a tricky question because genocide can be thought of legally, morally, and politically. And these three levels should really be distinguished. Legally, I don't think the evidence exists to say that there's a deliberate ethnic intention of eliminating the Palestinian people. Politically, I definitely think there's a genocidal set of policies that have tried to dispossess, displace, and dehumanize the Palestinians. And that could perhaps be framed in a legally credible way. And then morally, of course, the apartheid, as it's enacted through violence, is a form of genocidal control. And so the issue is not one that should be viewed as a kind of comparison with what the Nazis did to the Jews. This is a different reality and should be understood differently. And as Omar, I think, very wisely talked about the emphasis on context sensitivity, I think it's important to put this kind of potentially inflammatory language in the context of Israeli apartheid, which itself is a crime against humanity, and relate it to genocidal behavior, not to the consummated crime of genocide.
So, yeah, it's a tricky question, and it's not a term, I guess, to be thrown around loosely. So thanks for those distinctions of the different forms of genocide and where they sit. I have a question from Patricia. It's probably for all three panelists. With the recent appointment of Emmy Palmer to Facebook, do you think the tech giants like Google, Apple, Facebook, etc., play a negative or positive role in the struggle for justice for Palestine? Or is it relevant at all? Ooh, well, now, and of course, I was just looking up my notes there. She was a former Director General of Israeli Ministry for Justice, the Cyber Unit. So, and she's now controlling the content on Facebook, what goes up and what comes down. So really, it's a general question on these tech giants that have this control. Do you think it's a positive or negative, or is it relevant? Anyone want to kick off on that? Omar?
Well, I can, yeah, Fatim, please go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I want to, Omar, I'll pass it to you, Omar, and then I'll go back to the campaigns, if you don't mind, Dermot, before we go, the campaigns we were talking about.
Yes. Sorry, I meant to ask you to come back on the Irish context campaigns. Thank you. So Omar, on this.
Sure. Yes, there's a campaign, a global campaign led by Jewish Voice for Peace and some Palestinian groups working on social media rights and others around the world, including in the UK and elsewhere, South Africa and so on, that are working to pressure Facebook to remove Palmer from its advisory committee on what content is acceptable and what not, because she was exactly in a position to censor Palestine, to censor Palestinian voices. So how should she gain this much power in the Facebook discussions on content and what's acceptable and what's not? Of course, social media is extremely important. It plays a very, very important role, despite it being very censorious. Facebook predominantly, and Facebook means Instagram, WhatsApp, and everything the Facebook conglomerate leads. But also we're seeing increasingly from YouTube and other platforms, now Zoom as well, we're seeing censoring Palestinian voices on the rise. And if people think, well, that's a Palestinian problem, why should I worry? Then they're not really following. That's how McCarthyism started, when people said, oh, they're after the communists, so who cares? And then, oh, they're after the Jews, I'm not Jewish, so who cares? But then they were after everyone dissenting from the US imperialist line, basically. And similarly here, if they manage to suppress BDS or to suppress Palestine solidarity, no social movement is safe. Black Lives Matter is not safe. LGBT groups are not safe. Women's rights groups are not safe. Trade unions are not safe. No one is safe. So it's in everyone's interest to fight for our freedom of expression and to distinguish between hate speech that incites to violence, racist violence on the one hand, and free speech that allows people different points of views. Israel wants to suppress all speech advocating for Palestine and Palestinian rights. And this is a McCarthyism that harms every social justice movement, and we should all resist it.
Thank you. That's a very clear explanation, and it's good to bring up the point that it's not just affecting Palestinians' free speech. It's global. Richard, would you say something on this, and then Fatin, I'll come back on the campaigns.
Well, I think Omar covered it very admirably and impressively. I would only add that there is this excessive power that is been accumulated, economic power and political influence, and it becomes a threat to not only freedom of expression, but the nature of democracy in the contemporary world. That one, it was outrageous that Facebook would make such an appointment on such a sensitive, in relation to such a sensitive issue. And it shows that unless you make these high-tech mega organizations accountable morally and legally and constitutionally, the society is very victimized by manipulative censoring and filtering of information. And the Palestinians are targeted and have suffered enough from the way in which power is used in our world, so that at least in the area of free speech and freedom of expression, we should be vigilant in protecting and denouncing efforts to encroach upon what a democratic society should expect.
Thank you for adding on there to what Omar had said. So Fatin, you wanted to come in and maybe give us some local campaigns or Irish campaigns or campaigns going on at the moment within.
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much, Richard and Omar, for all the informative talks. For our campaign, of course, we take the lead from the BNC, the Palestinian-led organization, the BDS. And we do follow, of course, we have the AXA campaign asking the Irish people to boycott AXA and raise that within the society, ask people to divest from it. We have the HB, of course, and we've collected more than 10,000 signatures, and we're gonna go and hand them in, and with a big action here in Ireland. But unfortunately, because of the COVID, everything is paused for the moment. But we still we ask every organization, all the trade unions, of course Dublin City Council voted on the HB as well, in the north as well. Derry and Staban County District, they all voted not to have HP computers and technology in schools. So we do lobby and raise awareness around this HP to boycott the HP or divest, from asking the HP to divest. We have it here in Ireland running, and we have the petition, as I said. And please, you have all the information you need in www.ipsc.ie. Roxanne, of course, which I mentioned briefly, which is the coalition. We have to end this. It's heartening and it's sickening to know that this involves a coalition between the Gardaí, which the Irish police here, and the PSNI and the Israeli Ministry for Public Security, which is, this has to be, it can't be right. So people have to lobby their politicians and ask the Gardaí to stop this, and giving the Israeli the privileges all they have within the EU, the Horizon 2020, which Roxanne is one of these projects. Again, we have the apartheid-free zone, which I mentioned as well, that people can join. Many other campaigns I can't think of, but you have. No,
that's
you have all the information.
It's on the website. Yeah, I think
there's also the academic boycott, of course. Many staff and students are involved in academic boycott campaigns on Irish universities and colleges, and of course the cultural boycott.
The cultural boycott, which we
very,
have
very vivid in Ireland. Yes,
absolutely. We have now more than 700 artists who signed the pledge to boycott Israel apartheid, which is great success, and hopefully it will continue as well. For artists to divest and to boycott Israel culturally.
Yeah, thank you, Fatin, for going through some of those Irish contexts. I had hoped to wrap up at 8:15. I think I will just take one more question, and I have one here, but in a way you've answered it, but I'll relate two questions together here. In the light of recent arrangements between Israel and UAE and Bahrain, do you still maintain that Palestinian prospects rest on activism of people rather than diplomacy of governments or the UN? Well, I think, Omar, you probably answered that well. You believe that the activism, and indeed the three panelists believe the activism of people is probably crucially important. I think you've said that in both your talks. And there's
more than ever.
More than ever. Sorry, I'll add to that, more than ever. And there's a related question, which maybe one of you would have a comment on. In the light of recent developments in the ICC, the International Criminal Court, in relation to Israeli war crimes, do you think any progress will be made in this court, or is this a false hope? Well, Richard, I think that's your territory here.
Well, I think there is already sufficient progress that it's caused this furious kind of unprecedented backlash in Washington and Tel Aviv, that even the idea of investigating well-evidenced accusations of Israeli and US crimes in Afghanistan are to be treated as an outrage, such that the US had the audacity to impose sanctions on the prosecutor for daring to recommend opening an investigation. Now, whether the ICC is strong enough and robust enough and independent enough to persist is an open question. But it's symbolically extremely important because one sees by the resistance that Israel has attempted to mount how sensitive it is about such allegations. And such sensitivity is itself a way of understanding just how guilty Israel has been of engaging in behavior in any number of contexts that are flagrant violations of the Geneva Conventions and of the ICC, the International Criminal Court's own statute. So if there's justice in the world, the investigation will go forward. But if geopolitics is able to squelch it, it will do everything it can to reach and to prevent such a result.
Thank you. That says a lot. Any further comments from Fatina or Omar on that question? No. Okay. So I think we'll wrap up the Q&A session now, and I have to ask Katie Martin to come in she's a member of the Comhlámh Justice for Palestine group, and she's going to, hello Katie, and she's going to say a few words about how to stay in touch with the group and where you find the links and so on. So over to you, Katie. We're not hearing you at the moment.
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, perfect. The headphones are out. So thank you, David, and thank you very much to our panelists, Fatin, Richard, and Omar. So I'm Katie. I'm a member of Comhlámh's Justice for Palestine. So we're a voluntary membership group. We usually meet every Sunday at 8 via Zoom now due to COVID. If we have something big coming up, it can be maybe once a week. So we are dedicated to promoting the rights of the Palestinian people and achieving justice for Palestinian people. So far, we've campaigned to build support for the Occupied Territories Bill, as well as educating members of the public through social media on what's happening in Palestine at the moment under Israeli occupation. And over the summer, we've been working towards launching Comhlámh's public support of BDS, which is why we're all here tonight. I think personally, as an activist, the idea of BDS really spoke to me in the sense that every time we spend money, we're voting for the type of world we want to live in. So as a group, we want to empower other people to know the impact of seemingly small actions, such as what we purchase in the supermarket or what we're writing to our politicians about. I think many people, especially in Ireland, have been really inspired by the Dunnes Stores anti-apartheid strike in 1984, and the impact that the actions that the workers had shows the power that BDS can have as well. So in keeping with that, one of our members sent me a quote just before the meeting, and it said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And I think that really speaks to what we're trying to do as a group and join up with other groups that are doing the same. So as a group, we want to actively express our Palestinian solidarity and to take meaningful action in achieving justice, such as through the support of BDS, but also through lobbying the government and public education. So if anyone was interested watching tonight and you'd like to know more about us or how to support Palestine and BDS, you can follow us on social media via Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. All of our handles are under the video. If you also just search Call of Justice for Palestine, you'll find us. And we also have email, so you can message us at justiceforpal@comhlámh.org. And going forward, we are planning a number of actions and the continuation of our support for BDS and collaboration with other groups such as the IPSC. So thank you very much. Please feel free to send us a message.
Thank you very much, Katie, for that. So I'll give the final word back to the panelists, and I'm just asking for a sentence or two of encouragement, and we'll take it in the order that we did our talks. So Fatin, would you give us 2 sentences of encouragement and
before the sentence?
Inspiration.
Congratulations again for Comhlámh, and thank you very much. And we're looking forward to work with you, the IPSC and Comhlámh together for justice, freedom, and solidarity for Palestinian people, because none of us are free until all of us are free. Keep the hope.
Thank you. Richard?
Well, I think this panel has demonstrated that this is the moment where the peoples of the world have both an opportunity and a responsibility to engage in solidarity efforts to end this long period of oppression that the Palestinian people have endured. It's a time to act and to stop thinking that governments or international institutions can do the job. It's up to us, the people of the world, to make the governments do what they should be doing spontaneously.
Thank you very much. And Omar, final say, as co-founder of BDS, it's appropriate you say it at the end.
Yes, well, thank you very much again for endorsing BDS, and thanks to the people of Ireland for everything they've done in solidarity with Palestine. We really look forward to more work to end your government, your corporation's complicity in Israel's system of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid. It's everyone's job to do no harm. It's everyone's job to end complicity. It's not instead of your other so many struggles for social, economic, gender justice. It's climate justice, of course. It's part of this progressive wave against authoritarianism, against the growing fascism, neoliberalism, and for everyone's freedom, justice, and equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank and I'm sure the viewers, I'll thank them, you on behalf of the viewers. Thank the 3 panelists for those excellent talks. And I hope the viewers, you found it interesting and informative. And I need to, of course, thank Comhlámh for hosting the evening, and the Comhlámh Justice for Palestinian group for doing the organization. So good night.
And Mark for screening.
Keep safe. Yes, keep safe, and hopefully we'll see you again at Dublin. Slán agus Ihawa.
Thank you.